Okay, I think we'll get started. It's about noon. Thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at Humana. And thanks for tuning in, supporting Humana's Lunch and Learn program. This is something we started way back at the beginning of the pandemic and have continued, and it's just a great way to feature a lot of interesting raptor research topics and stay connected with all of you. So we're excited to have Bill Clark here speaking today about a fascinating topic, unusual raptor plumages. And just a few notes before we get started. You can always change your view settings if you need to by clicking on view in the upper right corner. Everybody except Bill should be muted throughout the talk. And please engage with us in the chat if you can. We would love that. So Bill Giuliano is our executive director, and he's here moderating the chat today. So let us know where you're tuning in from. Feel free to type in questions throughout the talk, and Bill will feed them to the other Bill at the end of the talk. And the chat window is also a great place to enter your email address and your name if you want to join our e-newsletter, and that gets sent out usually once or twice a month, so you can keep up to date with just upcoming Humana news and events. What else can I say? This event is being recorded, and it's going to be live streamed on Facebook, and these recordings are going to be available on our website at a later date. We're a little bit behind getting some of the older talks up on our website, but you can always watch them anytime on our Facebook page, our Humana Facebook page. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill Giuliano to introduce our speaker.
Great. As Julie said, I'm Bill Giuliano, the relatively new executive director here. It's great to see so many of you here. And we're excited to have Bill Clark here today to tell us about those unusual raptor plumages. Bill's been working with birds of prey for what, Bill, over 50 years now? Photographer, author, researcher, lecturer, done it all with birds of prey, including 5 years as director of the National Wildlife Federation's Raptor Information Center. He's published numerous articles on raptors, studied and photographed them all over the world, regularly leads birding and raptor tours and workshops, and I guess for a while now, almost 2 decades, been living down in the Rio Grande Valley, where he still regularly teaches some courses on raptor field identification and biology. So he'll tell us about some of that now, and please welcome Bill.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill and Julie, and hi to Don. And today I'm going to talk to you from the Rio Grande Valley, as I call it, because it's all Spanish, and about unusual raptor plumages that I've accumulated over the years. And this includes melanistic birds, partial albino birds, dilute plumage or leucistic birds, hybrids, and many others. Raptors don't always look like their illustrations in the field guide. I'm hearing a sound, somebody's not muted or something's coming through. As we can see from this plate of northern harriers. And what I'm referring to is an article that was in Western Birds on a melanistic harrier. And this was seen by quite a few people. David Sibley was one of them, and he actually drew a couple of diagrams that was published in that. It also includes things like partial albino redtails, which sometimes are almost all white. This one has a couple of black feathers in it. So the areas that I'm going to cover include partial albinism, amelanism or leucism, as it's known, dilute plumage, melanism, hybrids, and lots of other conditions that make the birds look different. So partial albino is a condition in which some feathers lack pigmentation, that is, they're completely white. The eye and the skin colors are normal, and usually the talons. This name has been used in the ornithological literature for more than 150 years. Albinism is different. It's probably genetically different. It's the complete lack of pigmentation, which includes the skin, the eyes, the talons. This is really rare in raptors, and it's different from partial albinism. Leucism is neither of these. Even though leucism means whitish, it really refers to a dilute plumage or melanism, a reduction in the amount of pigmentation. A recent author claimed that there's no such thing as partial albino and compared it to being partially pregnant. Well, he's completely off base. It's better compared to an eclipse, either a partial eclipse or a full eclipse. Leucism is often misused for partial albino, but it really means a reduction in pigmentation, not an absence, as I'll show you later. And when we get to red-tailed hawk, you'll see that the conditions affect the birds differently. Look it up. If you don't trust me, Google leucism versus partial albino. So partial albino, these are red-tailed hawks. Notice they're adults. So this condition occurs only in adults and more often with females. And this is reported in all of continental North America. And it's probably the most numerous of the unusual plumages we'll be looking at. So it varies from a few feathers, as on this adult red tail, to one with quite a few feathers, to one that's mostly white, to some that are almost completely white. There was a chap in Missouri that had 3 adult white-tailed, almost completely white red-tailed hawks, but they still had dark eyes and they had yellow in the legs. So they were not albino, they were partial albino. Here are some other examples. This is from British Columbia, not too far from Vancouver, the female. And so here are some birds from Arizona, Montana, and Washington. No two look exactly alike. There's a different feathers involved in every case. Here's a bird from California that Pleat Bloom was in his study area, captured. It was an adult female, and she had 2 dark chicks. And notice the chicks were dark, were also dark. We weren't partial albino. The chicks were banded. They left the area, but they never came back. So he never had a chance to verify that the chicks would be partial albino. There's an adult male mated with a dark female. And again, as I mentioned, the juveniles that are produced in these unions are normal. We showed 2 adults in our North American raptor field guide. Brian took one near Tucson, and the bird that I showed you is in Virginia. There are quite a few specimens in museums. I'm a museum hound. I've been in many museums, and I don't know how many different ones I've seen, but they go into the double digits. Specimens in 23 museums, and some of them have more than one. So a question that comes up is, does the amount of white change with time? So this is a bird I banded down here in 2011, and it was seen by Eric Brunke and taken photographs of, including a bird that was banded, and it was in this exact same location where I banded this bird, and it was 5+ years later, and you can see it's gotten much whiter than it was when it was originally banded. The same thing with Jim Zip, who had this bird in December 2015. It wasn't banded, but it was in the same location 3 years later, and it also was much whiter than it was on the original. It also occurs in Harlan's hawk, which is closely related to red-tailed. I don't believe it's a red-tail. I think it's a separate species, but that's another story. It came from a red-tail. In any case, it also shows this condition. Now we have a bald eagle. The bird on the very right of that limb is a juvenile. It shouldn't have a white head at that age. Here's an older immature that's very whitish. Here's an adult with a complete white belly, and another white with an even more complete white belly. A broadwing hawk. This is an adult because of the dark eyes, and we know it's a broadwing hawk because of the wing shape. And but again, so it's a partial albino. Here's a lovely looking bird, the black vulture. We don't think of them as lovely, but this one does come out real well in that plumage. A kestrel with a few white feathers, an adult male kestrel with many feathers that would normally be all different colors being white. And this was a bird that was taken in black and white because they only published black and white in a journal from Saskatchewan that's very white. This merlin has one white feather. Now, when you get one white feather, this could be due to a mechanical injury. The follicle could be damaged if it hits something. Here's that bald eagle again, the juvenile with the white head, but it also has white in the primaries. And this is a common black hawk. This is actually pictures from Panama. They sent this to me, asked me what kind of a species it was, having written a field guide for the raptors of Mexico and Central America. And it was a partial albino juvenile common black hawk. Here's a sharp-shinned hawk with a couple of white feathers in the tail. Here's one with white feathers on the back of the head. This golden eagle specimen has a white feather in the right wing. This one in flight has a white secondary in the left wing. And the specimen also has white in the tail feathers. Here's a juvenile golden eagle. They usually show quite a bit of white, but this has much more white than it should in the body. The same with this bird here. This white here is abnormal, partial albino. And here's a peregrine falcon from South America, the subspecies that's down there. That's much whiter than it should be. And this is a Peel's falcon, a juvenile. And this is what they should look like. Shouldn't have all this white in the throat, up the sides of the cheek. Here's a white-tailed hawk. Let's look this picture down here. It shouldn't have a big white belly like this. And turkey vulture. This is an interesting two pictures here. Michael Pierce is the staff photographer for the Wichita, Kansas Eagle newspaper. And he was just driving around and saw this partial albino turkey vulture and took pictures of it, took a lot of other pictures of it. And his editor let him write a Sunday special for that. Some of them are quite white all over. Some of them just have a few white feathers. Now, this is an interesting bird. I took this picture. The date was October the 9th. The year is immaterial. In Veracruz at the Hawk Watch in Cardell, right from the count on top of the Hotel Bienvenido. And 2 years later, 2 years and a few days later, I got a picture sent, but almost exactly the same. And it was taken by one of the hawk watchers down there. And it looked just like the same, probably the same individual passing through on the same date. Now, this bird has some white in the secondaries, this turkey vulture. And this turkey vulture, I chased it around a sugarcane field to see what was this white. And it actually was a white feather that had been sewn at the top into the top of the wing. The banding lab said no one had permission to do this, so somebody did this on their own. They somehow captured this bird and they wanted to be able to recognize it, so they sewed that feather in. Here is an osprey that has white in the primaries where it shouldn't be. And here's a northern harrier that's much whiter than it should be. This was published in Birding Magazine. So now we're going to look at leucism or amelanism or dilute plumage. All three refer to the same condition. And this is a turkey vulture. And you notice it isn't really white, it's an off-white. So there is a reduction in the amount of melanin, but not an absence. And here's a red-tailed hawk. And if we look closely, we see this is a juvenile with a pale eye, and it doesn't have a red tail. And again, you see it's not really white, it's an off-white. There's a certain amount of dirtiness to it. And here's an adult red-tailed hawk on this condition. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, the partial albino does not occur in juvenile red-tailed hawks, but the leucism does occur. Here is an adult that I took pictures of in Arizona. And when I first found it, you can see that there's a lot of pale coloration in the bird. I went back the next year and I couldn't get close to it like I did the year before, but it appears to be even whiter than it was before. Again, another juvenile and a specimen and a rehab bird of leucism. And here is a bird captured on migration. Now, they don't always look alike because the uniformity of the feathers, which is very uniform in this bird, but not necessarily on other birds. And this was captured for banding at Cape May by Arthur Nelson. And this bird was taken for falconry in Washington State by Simone. And this is the plumage. This is its plumage when it's a juvenile. This is the plumage when it's an adult. And this is the plumage that in juvenile, just starting to get adult plumage. But you can see, because there's a reduction in the amount of pigmentation, that the ultraviolet has broken down a lot of the melanin in the birds. So they tend to be whiter then because of that too. Now here's again a bald eagle. This is a normal bald eagle, and this is one with the dilute plumage. Here's another one. This one's more uniform than this one. This bird was a breeding bird at the Whidbey Island Naval Air Station in Washington State. Now this was found not too far away, so these two are probably related. Maybe not the same bird. Here's a bird that looks different because it's much more uniform, and the pigmentation is stronger than it is in these two. Again, this is from Washington State. Took that picture. Tony took that picture on the Skagit Flats. So this is a juvenile bald eagle, which should be dark brown. This is kind of a medium brown. And here's another one that's much more whitish and much more speckled. The same with this bird here that is in the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, Maryland. All it says on there is immature bald eagle, and for many years I kept telling them this is a leucistic bird and you should label it that way, but it never got labeled. Here's a red-shouldered hawk, and this is a juvenile, which should be all brown, should have streaks here. We know it's a red shoulder, and we know it's a juvenile because of the eye color and the tail band. And here's another red shoulder, the California subspecies, a little bit darker, again, more uniform colored, but again, leucistic or dilute plumage. Here's a bird that's different from them in that the wings appear normally colored, but the body and the head are pale. Here's a rough-legged hawk taken by Don Bryant, who is with us today. Thank you, Don, for these pictures. And this is an adult female rough-legged hawk, and you can see that it's not it's rough-legged hawk, dark carpal patches, etc. And you can see that it's not normally colored. This is a Harris's hawk specimen in the Houston Museum of Natural History, and you can see all of these feathers that are pale here are not fully pigmented. This juvenile Harris's hawk, much more uniformly pale all over. Jim Sinclair took that near in the very eastern part of Texas. There's a white-tailed kite. Here's an adult taken in South Texas by Bill Sapolsky. Of course, they should be much darker than that. American kestrel. This was banded by Reese Lukai in Southern Virginia on migration. And here's one that I took in Texas. I tried my best to catch it, but I could only get it photographed. Lance and Gio Morrow took the picture of the bird on the left in Texas. And you'll notice this tail, and I'll talk about this in the next slide. They also had this bird as a breeding female, which is a very strange coloration. Most of the red browns here are replaced by grays. And so again, you can see this tail band from the previous slide. And here are two different males that Mike Tincher sent me with the same kind of condition, with a space in the middle of the tail where they didn't replace pigmentation. And here's a juvenile Harris's hawk that I caught that has the same kind of condition. So Merlin, here's an adult male Merlin. This black color should be dark gray. I think it's probably because of using the film that causes it to be blackish. And here's an adult female that's coffee brown. Again, Southeast Virginia by Reese Lukai. And Steve Gass took this picture of a juvenile crested caracara that should be much darker brown. And in South America, there's a whole population along the coast of Argentina where many of the birds are this coloration. And here's from the article describing it. So you can see some normal birds, but many of the birds have this dilute plumage or leucism. And here's the coast. This is the ocean. And these are the places where, and they do call it leucistic, so they've got that right. I found specimens of both sharkshin, Cooper's, and goshawk in museums that suffer from this condition. And this is a common black hawk. Here are pictures of a northern harrier, one from Washington State, the other from across the country in Rhode Island. Here is a white-tailed hawk. This bird was tried to catch it in a sugarcane field. It couldn't catch it, but this should be much darker brown, like two birds here. So this is normal. This is leucistic. Now, Rob Palmer sent me this picture of a burrowing owl, one normal, one leucistic. You also get birds that are completely pale, and this is a Cooper's hawk that should be much darker. And this is another Cooper's hawk. Oh, sorry, let me go back to this one again. This bird here was caught in Veracruz by the people running the big count there, also are banding birds. And then it showed up with this picture. It was taken in near Fargo, North Dakota by Tim Driscoll as a breeding bird. This bird here hit a window casualty in Philadelphia where Vireo is. That's the slide file for ornithology. And so Doug Wessler was the director then, so he took pictures of it. And it's an adult Cooper's hawk, but it has no rufous on the breast. I was sent this picture and asked, what is this bird? And it's an adult broadwing hawk. It's just that the ends of the wings and the end of the tail are not there. What happened? They were burned off, most likely by a methane burner. And here's an article written on the study of methane burners. So here's a methane burner at a landfill. And so this burning methane so that it doesn't cause a greenhouse gas. But there is a plume coming up here that's very hot going up because it burns at a very high density. And this is an attractive perch. So when the raptor lands there and faces outward, the tips of the tail and tips of the wings can get burned off. Here's another kestrel with some very minor burning on the tips, but it lives enough to start its molt. Next thing I want to talk about is long-bill syndrome. This is an adult red-tailed hawk, but the beak itself is extra long. Now, this has been studied, this was many years ago, quite a few years now in Alaska on black-capped chickadees. And the researchers there are looking at various causes, and they've coined the condition avian keratin disorder because the beak is made of keratin. And Bud Anderson was seeing quite a few of these birds. He has a bird that when he was bird control at SeaTac Airport, one of his adults was nesting there and had this condition, and it would grow down and then it would break like this and then break off, and then it would be short bill, and it would grow back again. But they didn't remove that bird because he knew about the airplanes, so he avoided the airplanes. Anyhow, interesting. I've seen this on a whitetail hawk down here. This is a juvenile where the lower mandible completely continues to grow out. And Jeff Kidd sent me one of a California red shoulder with the same condition. Here's a caracara picture I took many years ago down here at a chicken farm. And oh, what happened here? Okay, there should be another picture there. Anyhow, the beak grows out there. And this is a very unusual one because this is from Asia. This is from Nepal. And this is a steppe eagle in the same genus as our golden eagle. And you can see obviously that the lower mandible is extending off to the left of the beak. Here's some Harris's hawks, this one with an extra long upper mandible. And here's one with an extra long lower mandible. Now, this picture came from down here. And this is an osprey, again, with the lower mandible extending beyond the beak, the crossbill. We can also talk about melanism. This is an osprey, and it's completely dark. Many years ago, I was in South Florida. I was being shown around by an Air Marine Corps volunteer to various raptor nests. He was working with Ken Myers on the raptors down there breeding. And so we were having lunch, and he asked me if they ever heard of an osprey that was melanistic. And I said, no. I said, he said, well, these people have been watching one. Oh, yes. And I said, maybe it was a juvenile bald eagle. And they said, been watching it for 5 years. So I met the people and that afternoon, and they showed me pictures of their bird, which they called Johnny. And then they said, are you free tomorrow morning? And I said, why? And they said, well, we just had a cancellation. We got 2 seats open and you can come with us and it doesn't cost you anything. And when they said come with us, they took people in their houseboat down through, out of Everglades City, down through the various mangrove keys, and Johnny was there. So I did that. And so later in the morning, we found him. And so I got these pictures of him. They just drove right up to him. And then I went back and had lunch, and I rented a little motorboat, a fishing boat, and I went down there. But I couldn't get close to him because he didn't know that one. He knew their boat. In any case, they told me the whole story. He'd been there for 5 years and he couldn't attract a mate. And so anyhow, I published this in the Wilson Bulletin and theorized that because of this dark coloration, all of the breeding signs of a normal osprey, which is a very complex underwing pattern, are not seen, so that he couldn't attract a female. So here is harriers. Again, we talked about the first melanistic harrier from Steve Howell and David Sibley. Jerry Ligori had a record, a photograph that he took in Utah, and Rob Miller took a picture of a third bird. This one's definitely adult male in up above Boise. And here is a sharp-shinned hawk from California, originally published as something else. But really it's just a melanistic sharp-shin. Here's a melanistic red-shouldered hawk, which is much darker than it should be. And here's a Cooper's hawk. And notice the difference in this bird and the last bird. This is not uniform. This has areas of normal pigment. It reminds me of some of the birds that we saw when I was banding raptors in Eilat, Israel, that had oil stains on them. Where it would be patchy like this, but this definitely did not have any oil stains. This was published, by the way. Here is a bird that was caught by Lance and Joe Norrow in their place in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. It flew into their barn chasing their pigeons, and they closed the barn door and caught it with a dip net. And of course, they banded it and let it go. But of course, the underparts are, the upper parts don't look too different, but the underparts are completely dark. Here's another bird similar to that. This is taken up near Fort Worth in Texas. Again, completely dark. And here's a female kestrel that is very darker. It's darker than it should be. It was taken in Philadelphia. It's in the specimen in Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. Here's a picture, a black and white picture of a male that's overall blackish, lacking the real grays before. So when there is excessive dark pigmentation and it's passed on, that is, it's not a detriment to breeding as it is in many buzzards, bootios. They're colorblind. That's why there are color morphs in bootios, I believe. Then it becomes a dark morph. And melanism just refers to an abnormal plumage that most likely is detriment to breeding. So it's dark morph, rough-legged hawk. And then we have birds with that are sexually dimorphic, but had characters of both sexes. And so this is an adult female that John Smallwood had breeding in his project for many years. But as the bird got older, it started showing male characters, gray in the plumage here and dots down here, and tail feathers that are adult male. And even though we call it an andromorph, it's really just an old female. And a similar specimen was taken with not so many male characters, just half of the tail was male by Jimmy Parrish et al. And published in the Condor. The condition is probably because of a buildup of testosterone, which is reported in snail kite. Now, in our field guide, we show a normal adult female snail kite, but then we also show ones that get much more adult male-like, much darker in color, much more gray in there. And but anyhow, the people reported that there was a buildup in these birds that were older of snail kite, of testosterone, yes, testosterone, because the females have no way to get rid of it. So normally sharp-shinned hawk juveniles have yellow eye. This one had a brown eye. Here's a Cooper's hawk, again, juvenile with a brown eye. It's also partial albino. And you can see one eye is good. This one can see, but the dark eye was blind. I sent this picture by Nick and said, what are these white areas here on the leading edge of the wing? So if we look closely at all the different pictures, we can see that the alula, the thumb, if you would, is not laying on the top of the wing, but it's pointed downwards. So it's gotten bent. And so when it bent down, it left a little white spot underneath the sun down. And hybrids. Oh, hybrids cause problems. Captive bred hybrids like this one, which is a red tail hybrids, which is done artificially, produce some really strange looking birds. And here's some more that you can see at some falconry meets, and what have you. There is a book on avian hybrids of the world. It's getting a little bit outdated by now. I was in the LSU museum looking at specimens, and I came across this middle bird here, and I looked at it and I thought, I bet you're a hybrid. So I found a rough-legged hawk juvenile and a Swainson's hawk juvenile, and I put them on either side of this because I had been watching this bird, which was on the winter down near Fort Worth, and a colleague of mine had contacted me and asked me what I thought it was, and I said, well, it looks like a Swainson's. He said, yes, but it has its legs are feathered all the way down. So we tried for 3 days to catch it, and but we weren't successful. In any case, it gave me the idea that this was. So I went to the curator of the museum at the time, and he said, well, we can test this because we always take samples of the birds. And we have a DNA lab here, and I'll get one of the graduate students. How does that sound? And I said, wonderful. So Chris Witt tested the DNA of this bird, and mama was the Swainson's hawk. But remember, this got feathered tarsi. And so we knew it was a hybrid. Chris later did a postdoc at University of California, Berkeley, and he was able to determine that dad was a rough-legged hawk. We published this in the Wilson Journal. Jerry Ligori took pictures of a very similar bird up in Utah. And there was the case of the redback buzzard or variable hawk that showed up in Colorado in the 1990s. Brian Wheeler took a picture of the female here. And this is Mike Maurer and Joey Mason actually banded the youngster from the nest. And this is a picture of him. And I think I would be hard pressed to identify that guy. The Hawkwatch International had a breeding project where they were watching raptors. And this is a fledgling from a mixed pair of a red-tailed hawk, Swainson's hawk pair in Utah. And they sent samples of this to Josh Hall, and he verified that it was a hybrid using DNA. This bird was captured in Tennessee, just over the border from North Carolina, at the Southern Appalachian Raptor Research, a raptor banding place. And when it came in, they first saw it, they thought, oh, this is our first goshawk. But then when they looked at it, they said, this isn't a goshawk. It's a little different. The measurements are wrong. So they finally determined it was a goshawk Cooper's hawk. And they published this in North American Birds. Here's another bird that was photographed near Hawk Mountain. And this one was captured near Hawk Mountain. Again, hybrids. This is a juvenile that was captured at Cape May. Again, Arthur Nelson was the one that caught it again. And so he was taking measurements of it using the measurements of the wing and the tail, and the weight, et cetera. And it wouldn't work out for either goshawk or Cooper's hawk. So they started looking at it and called some other people, and they decided it was a juvenile. And they fortunately took a couple of feathers of it. And later they contacted somebody at a DNA lab. They ran it through and they verified by the DNA from the feathers that it was a juvenile, and published it in Wilson Journal. Here's a picture of a adult that has a red tail, but it has dark purple patches and a belly. So this is most likely a red tail rough-legged hybrid taken in Maryland. And this was taken in California. Again, a rough-legged red tail hybrid. If you look closely at the legs, you see the legs are feathered all the way down. It could be a back cross because it has more characters of red tail. Steve Christensen published this paper as adult ferruginous hawk, and Jerry Ligori questioned him on it, and he said, that doesn't look like an adult. And he said, maybe it's a hybrid. And he said, well, maybe that explains this picture. He said, I've been seeing these birds hanging around, a male red tail and a female ferruginous hawk hanging around together, but he didn't let anybody know, so we couldn't go looking for the nest. But most likely that's what this is. And Ted Floyd, who is the editor of Birding magazine, took this picture of a hybrid red-tailed ferruginous in Colorado. And instances of hybrids that I came across many years ago somebody sent me this picture from Julie's Magic Light Show of this red tail, which had some other pictures in it, including pictures showing the tail, and saying, what is this? And everybody kind of figured out that it was red-tailed, red-shoulder hybrids. And it turns out that there are quite a few records of them. And so we're starting off with this Dale Martin in Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, Maine, Ontario, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. So quite a few. So this is quite a widespread phenomenon that kind of went by. We weren't really ready for it. Louis Bavier from Maine sent me this picture and this sonogram of this is a hybrid here, and this is a female, and she's breeding. And so he recorded the vocalizations of it. So this is what the hybrid sounds like. Can everybody hear that?
Not coming through on my computer, but hopefully other people can hear it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, here's a red-tailed hawk. And here's a red-shouldered hawk. So it doesn't sound like any of them. I'll play that again. A little bit low, and I've turned it up some in mine. Anyhow, there's another case of same hybrid, and this is actually a specimen. It's in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and mom was a red tail, dad was a red shoulder, and the bird was banded in the nest, and it was found dead near the nest about a month later, and so it was turned into the lab. Now here is a bird that is in the University of California Davis collection, and the curator showed me this, and they had published it in Western Birds as an Eastern red shoulder. And I looked at this and I said, well, this is not a pure red shoulder. It's got too many tail bands. This is all wrong. The throat is like this. There's no gray on the upper side of the wing, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the halix was, the hind talon was bigger than any red shoulders, including any Easterns, which are bigger. So I contacted them and some DNA people, and we did DNA on it. It was somewhat degraded. It just looked at macrosatellites, and the DNA came out different from the morphological. So morphologically, it's a hybrid, but the DNA said it was an Eastern red shoulder, and the number of tail bands, et cetera. So anyhow, the morphological evidence is not a pure red shoulder, but the DNA suggested it was an Eastern red shoulder, but that did not eliminate a back cross. That is the hybrid breeding again with red shoulder. So it's 3/4 red shoulder and 1/4 hybrid, 1/4 red tail. And that's what I think it is. In any case, we published this as contrasting the molecular and the morphological evidence for a possible hybrid. But I still believe it's a hybrid. And more unusual hybrid is one that Stan Moore out in California was watching, and that is a common black hawk was being seen there. He's been watching it for 4 or 5 years, and it turns out that it bred with a red-shouldered hawk and produced young. And Pete Bloom came down and banded the young, and it was seen later on. You can see the color bands on it. Again, this bird right here, if I saw this in the wild, if you sent me a picture of it, I have to say, I don't know what it is, hybrid. In any case, Stan ran into some personal problems and ended up the rest of his life in jail. And fortunately, Jennifer Colson took all of his information and pictures and everything and put together an article which he published with him in the Journal of Raptor Research. So at least all of his good work is now in this publication. Now, as a follow-up, these two birds, could be the same bird, are being seen there. They're not obviously completely common black hawk, or they're definitely not a red-shouldered hawk, and they don't have bands on it. So again, this could be, again, hybrids. Now, this picture is from Victoria Island, outside of, I'm sorry, Vancouver Island, outside of Victoria. And this is a salmon run, and the area is closed off so the bald eagles can eat the salmon, but they had remote cameras. And so the guy running the remote cameras saw this bird here, this one in the background. I can stop this, oops, I can stop this periodically. I'm going to do that. Okay. And look at it. So you can see that it's much bigger than this adult bald eagle, but look at the head shape and the head size. The beak is much bigger and what have you. And so I was sent a picture of this and I said, well, it's possible that it's a stellar seagull, which there have been a couple of records in Alaska. Look how much bigger it is there. But I got quoted as saying it's absolutely that. And I said, no. So they sent me the whole thing. So I stopped it periodically, and you could stop it and look at the molt. So this bird here has gone through 2.5 molts. So it's 2.5 years old. Looking at the plumage of it, the tail is dark, so it's definitely not a pure stellar seagull. And so the most likely thing is it's a hybrid. And so I published that in Birding Magazine as a hybrid bald versus stellar seagull. And this adult peregrine was captured from the State House in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as a breeding female, but she didn't breed. Now, it doesn't look exactly like a peregrine, even though it's 3/4 of a peregrine. So once she was there on there all spring and didn't lay any eggs, so they thought something was wrong. So they went back and found out where she was from. She was hatched as a juvenile from the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Mom was a peregrine that was hacked out, and dad was a falconry bird that was most likely a hybrid, peregrine something, peregrine saker or peregrine cheer. In any case, she's 3/4 peregrine, but she still wasn't able to produce eggs. But her father was half peregrine, was fertile. And this is because of something called Haldane's rule, which the bird with the homogeneous sex characters is fertile, and the one with the heterogeneous is not fertile, and it's the opposite in mammals. This whitetail kite was shot with a crossbow bolt. I tried to catch it, and it obviously was feeding well enough so I could take it off, or at least cut it off. And this leg is useless, but it's with 1 foot, with this thing sticking out, it's still making a living. And here, Bud Anderson sent me a picture of this red-tailed hawk that showed feathering on the tarsi. And so in Buteo especially, but in other raptors, these cells on the legs can either be scales or they can be feathers. And this picture, I was sent this picture and say, what's with this bird's foot? This is a red-tailed hawk, but it looks like it has webbed feet. So there are no bands on this bird. So somebody didn't let it go on purpose. Most likely, it lost the leg because of a jaw trap used for trapping fur-bearing animals. And so it went into a rehab. There's a couple of them across the river. Lensusi runs a big one over there, could have been his operation. Anyhow, so they felt sorry for the birds, so they put this prosthetic on, and the only thing they could get was a duck one, and so that it could stand up and feed on two legs, and then it most likely escaped. But this is Central Park, by the way, the home of pale male. So anyhow, that's the end of unusual plumages. And Bill, if you want to feed me any questions that have come up during this time, I thank you all for your attention.
Great, interesting stuff there. You have something, Julie?
If you want to read off some questions, Bill, I can kind of wrap things up later.
Okay, we had a couple questions. Yeah, first, actually, I think it's from you, Julie. Question was, are there any efforts underway to put covers on those methane burners to deter birds?
You know, I haven't kept up with that. I hope that that there'll be a presentation, but there's a couple of people working on that. We'll run across them at I hope at the meeting. I know, I haven't talked to Joey Mason about it. She's done it, but there's several other people that are at the forefront. Yeah, I don't know that a cover would help though, because what you've got to do is prevent the birds from landing on the top of there. So some kind of a structure there that prevents them from landing actually on the lip is what's required.
Okay, let's see, another one. Kara asked, was the melanistic northern harrier seen by Sibley and others located in Southern California, or where exactly was that, do you know?
It was, oh boy, oh gosh, yeah, it was, it's in Northern California, Point Reyes. Yeah, Point Reyes.
Very good. One question I had was, notwithstanding the hybrids, but some of these other unusual plumages that you began with, do we know much about the genetic basis for those? The partial?
No, I don't think anybody's published on that, but that would certainly be a good theme to do that.
All right, we just had another question in here from Jerry. Is there any way to tell a sooty kestrel from a melanistic kestrel without it being in hand?
What was the first one?
Can you tell a sooty kestrel from a melanistic kestrel without it being in hand, only using photographs?
I don't know what a sooty kestrel is. I've never heard that. What? You mean covered with soot?
I'm not sure. I'm reading out of the chat room.
Well, gosh, yeah. Okay, there's always the possibility. Yeah, if it roosted in a chimney or something and got soot covered. Huh, I haven't thought about that. I'll have to give that some thought. So without having thought about it, I don't want to. No.
All right, let's see. Gertrude just sent one in. Could feathers on the tarsi occur without a genetic cause?
Well, in some of these cases, it's not a clear, what happens is not clear that it's just automatic go through. There are epigenetic conditions, and there are the external conditions can affect the expression of genes too. So, but it most likely is a genetic abnormality when it's a red-tailed hawk that shows up like this. And I guess you could also probably, with a rough-legged or ferruginous hawk, you could have some patchiness in the leg feathering if it's a genetic malfunction. But it's beyond me. I don't know.
All right, I think we have time for a couple more. Let's see. Elaine wanted or asked about explaining that rule you talked about when it comes to fertility again.
Haldane's rule. Okay, Haldane's rule. Yeah, it's that the chromosomes for for mammals, the males have a one X and one Y, and the females have two Ys. And with birds, it's the opposite. The letters are differently. And so but the homogeneous, the homozygous, where the sex that has the two chromosomes that are the same is more likely to be fertile than the one with the chromosomes that are very different in size.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Let's see. Molly wanted to know, she believes it's a goshawk red-shouldered hybrid that was found in Cape May. Was wondering if anything on that was ever published.
Well, I didn't hear about it. I'd love to follow it up.
All right, let's see. Jerry tells us we have 2 cases of kestrels that were determined to be, let's see, soot or ash covered, not melanistic.
I think the specimen that I showed you there was really dark, and if it was sooty, you'd be able to tell it. You'd be able to see that it had grime all through it, and this was normal feathers, what have you.
All right, I guess that'll be it for the questions. Everyone has indicated it was a great presentation, and I thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom. I'll just add one thing before I turn it over to Julie. Tomorrow, Amanda's going to kick off its new membership program, and I would encourage all of you to visit our website and join the Humana Kettle. Membership is really important to Humana. We haven't had it for a few years, but it supports all of our programs and operations, including allowing us to keep the Lunch and Learn series here, as well as Hawk Migration Studies free to everybody. So I would encourage all of you to go see our website and join the Humana Kettle.
Okay, Julie.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Bill. Both Bills. I thought that was just amazing, Bill. So fascinated to see so many of those birds I've never seen before like that. They were really striking. It made me wonder, how common hybrids are, and it definitely makes me think about the hawk watch and how that's going to complicate things, when we have these exhibitors breeding, it's hard enough as it is. So, yeah, it's just something to keep in mind when we see that Cooper's hawk that looks a little bit like a goshawk, but not quite, So just one more thing to add. And like Bill said, we're launching membership tomorrow. It's also sponsorship month for our Hawk Count migration database. So you can become a sponsor and get your name up on your favorite or local site. And next month we have Josh Haas. He's going to be offering his Hawk ID presentation again. I think maybe we need to do an ID session for just hybrids. But he's going to be back next month. I think that's going to be Wednesday, October 12th. And you can brush up on your Hawk ID, and we'll have registration for that up soon. He did that program last year, I believe, and it always has great photography and always really informative. So with that, just thanks again, Bill, and thank you everybody for joining, and have a great day.